Hello, welcome to Go Library. This is Dr. Ming. Today, our guest is Dan DiMicco, the former CEO and chairman of Nusa Steel Company, the trade advisor to Donald Trump during the 2016 presidential campaign, and chairman of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. I invite Dan to talk about the US-China WTO trade issues, as well as the impact caused by the pandemic upon American and global industries. Hello, Dan. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, first we talk about US-China in the context of the WTO, yeah? How has the American manufacturing industry been affected by China before and after China entered the WTO in December 2001?
Well, it's very much night and day. The period before the WTO and after the WTO and the issuance of permanent favored nation trading status, that was a necessary precursor to getting into the WTO. The manufacturing sector in the United States was functioning well, other than the normal economic recessions that come from time to time. We have had over the years issues with on trade, where mercantilism as practiced by both Japan and Germany had an impact on our manufacturing sector. In my book, American Made, Why Making Things Will Return Us to Greatness, I talk about the history. I talk about how we got to where we're at today. The book was published in 2015, so it's relatively current. It's only gotten worse, actually. But it's a totally different world. I mean, after the WTO, no matter what metric you look at, whether it's trade deficit, whether it's manufacturing job losses, the lack of manufacturing job creation, the destruction of our middle class, the millions and millions of jobs that have disappeared, and what's worse, the millions of jobs that never got created that would have been if we were manufacturing here and shipping around the world to places like China. When the Chinese agreed to become members of the WTO, they agreed to work towards becoming a market-based economy. They agreed to unwind their state-owned enterprises and a whole host of other things. They never did that. To this day, they have not done that. And that's 20 years. The impact has been very negative on U.S. manufacturing since 2000. Very negative. The steel industry is just one example. The Chinese had about 150 million tons of steelmaking capacity, somewhere between 100 and 150 million tons in the year 2000. 12 short years later, there were near 1 billion tons, 900 million tons of capacity. That literally destroyed the profitability of the global steel industry because of the massive overcapacity that was created by the Chinese government declaring the steel industry a national strategic industry, which meant they got all kinds of special goodies and benefits from the Chinese government. In addition to that, the Chinese government kept manipulating their currency to where they had a 50% cost advantage before anybody even opened their doors to manufacture. All these things, the subsidies that were given, the lack of pollution control costs that the rest of the world had, and so on, created a huge cost disadvantage. Most of it not related to how efficient anybody was, but basically to the unfair trading practices that were being practiced, and economic mercantilism that was being practiced by the Chinese. So it's been very, very damaging and the U.S. steel industry is about 2/3 of what it used to be. And the global steel industry is probably worse off than that. But that's been the same for all manufacturing, not just for steel. And, all along, you've seen a focus on stealing our technology. That has cost us upwards of $350 billion a year in losses for the last 15 plus years. All these things have a negative impact on our overall economic growth, job creation, the pay at which our workers are paid, because manufacturing jobs that have been lost pay much higher than service jobs, and so on. So, I mean, I could go on, and we'll answer some of your other questions. We'll cover some new territory, but basically it has been a very, very negative impact, and all because China did not honor its agreements and continued to maintain its mercantilism trading behavior. And that was particularly noticeable from the time they joined the WTO, actually before that, but in particular after that, up through the current time period. Even though they apparently have found a way to not, quote unquote, manipulate their currency the way they used to, it's still heavily imbalanced from a valuation standpoint versus the U.S. dollar. So in any case, that's a long answer to your question about what's the before and after. It's not good.
No. So what contributed to your success of reviving a major U.S. manufacturer and galvanizing the steel industry in the context of industrial recession?
Well, back in 2008, we had the Great Recession in this country. And that, of course, was occurring at the same time that around the world. And from the steel industry standpoint, that was when China was really adding on the additional capacity. At that time in 2008, the amount of global overcapacity was bordering on 400 to 600 million tons, most of it brought on by the massive build in China. Had they been a true market economy, they would have used the world supply of steel to take care of their steel needs and then built what they needed in addition to that, instead of creating all this overcapacity. The Great Recession was brought on by a number of factors, mostly financial. When I took over Nucor, it was in 2000. Nucor was still a successful steel company. Certain product lines struggled because of all the dumping that was taking place from around the world. I don't know if I'd call it reviving the Nucor as a steel producer, but we took on a strategy that basically said, let's find ways to take advantage of the environment we're in. We have a very strong balance sheet, and maybe we should look at consolidating the industry. In the early 2000s, the global steel industry was in a consolidation mode. We went to our government and got the Section 201 put in place that put tariffs on all incoming steel and forced the rest of the world to rationalize capacity. We rationalized a lot of capacity here in the United States. Nucor was one of the major acquirers because of our strong financial position, but so were several other companies. And as a group, we rebuilt the domestic industry for what would be considered the new normal. Globally, companies like Mittal grew to be the world's largest steel producers with over 120 million tons of steel making. And Nucor grew during that period of time through acquisitions and also greenfield using our new technologies, but mostly through acquisitions to go from about 10 million tons of steel making to about 26 million tons. And our success was based upon a number of factors. One is being very efficient, very low cost, highly productive, getting the dumping of steel that was destroying the pricing in our market to be stopped through the efforts of the 201 and the Bush administration. And then the global economy started taking off, in part because of China's growth. Things went well through 2008, and then we had the collapse at the end of that year. And basically, manufacturing in our industry in particular has been in a recovery mode ever since. Very slow recovery, which started to again get much better because of the policies implemented by our current president, President Trump, economic strategies, trade strategies, regulatory strategies, and what have you that stimulated the U.S. economy and did everything we could to make sure that things like trade were fair and we had a level playing field to compete on. We were able to see some significant improvements in growth and profitability. Unfortunately, the overcapacity created by China, the unleashing of the virus out of China into the United States and the world has had an extremely negative, costly impact on not only our industry, but also the world economy and the U.S. economy. We have now almost 40 million people on the unemployment line. But our success was based upon taking a look at how we spent our capital, making sure that we used it efficiently. We had a very strong balance sheet, and we grew the company through acquisitions, principally during the period of 2003 to 2008, and also with some new plants that allowed us to rebuild the company into being the #1 steel producer, both in volume and profitability in the Western Hemisphere. And Nucor still is a very strong company, but it is not enjoying very good times right now.
So can you compare innovations in the US and China?
Well, my answer will be somewhat sarcastic, okay? Because in the US, we have been known for developing new technologies and innovation, as other countries in the world have. China, on the other hand, has become world-renowned for stealing technology and stealing the innovation, and using their state-owned enterprises and predatory practices to destroy industries around the world, and particularly in the United States. And having taken our technology, they have been able to rebuild their industries to take advantage of the fact that ours were put out of business, whether it's in solar panels or steel or other things, you name it, it had a very broad impact. And China's been well known. It costs the United States alone about $350 billion a year in lost technology and IP theft. And so, in a very summary way, we've developed it, they've stolen it to gain their advantage, and that's not a very good thing at all. And that's why this administration has fought very hard to get that stopped. And I believe they will succeed one way or the other.
So, how has American industrial competitiveness been undercut by China?
Well, I've already spoken to much of that. Their use of predatory trade practices, mercantilistic state-owned enterprises that they give huge cost advantage to with free land, no interest loans or no loan repayments required, loan forgiveness, no environmental standards, no safety standards to the extent they are in the Western world, which avoids tremendous costs that we've all had to put into our operations to be able to satisfy our regulatory requirements. Their currency manipulation, all these things has created a trade playing field that is very much slanted in their direction. and allows them to undercut the pricing in any industry they choose to target. And they've chose to target many industries. And through predatory pricing, using this huge artificial cost advantage, they've been able to undermine one industry after another, put it out of business, and take that industry and build it again in China, sometimes with the help of our own multinational companies. But it has made it very difficult to be competitive from a cost standpoint, from a technology and from a efficiency standpoint. The industries in this country that still are around, like the steel industry and Nucor in particular, that I can speak to, are still as efficient, if not more efficient, and more productive than any other steel industry in the world, including the Chinese. So, but you have to be able to make a profit in a market-based economy, or you don't exist. That's not the case in a state-owned economy. One good example is that there were several years where Nucor was making more money than the entire Chinese steel industry, which was, we might be making 25 million tons, they'd be making 800 million tons, and we were making more money than they were because they weren't in the business to make money, they were in the business to swamp the world in steel, and not profit driven. When you're not a market-based economy, profit is not something that you focus on. So industrial competitiveness has been hurt, but and some industries have been destroyed. Others are still very viable, but we can't compete against governments. We have to be able to. Our government needs to make sure that we have a level playing field, and that's what the Trump administration is doing.
That's interesting. They don't make money. So what are the hidden costs of outsourcing to China?
Well, speaking for this country, there's some of the costs that I've already talked about. People, when all the outsourcing is going on and the U.S. multinationals together with our own U.S. government and the global government said, if we can get China's economy to grow, help them grow, they will create a middle class, and out of that middle class will become a more democratic country and a more market-based country. So we will do everything we can to help China's economy grow. Unfortunately, it's very clear today that the Chinese philosophy, the CCP philosophy, was to take advantage of that and to undercut the rest of the world's economies via the willingness of the global economies and global governments to help China develop. It's like the spider and the fly. China was the spider, the world was the fly. And come in, we will make you comfortable just before we eat you. So there are basic, straightforward costs that are there that you have to compete with, but the hidden costs to the United States and most other countries show up in the social costs, show up in the job losses, show up in the destruction of our communities and our middle class, show up in the lack of earning power and earning growth because the manufacturing sector has been decimated in this country, because we've lost our supply chains. I mean, when China wanted multinational companies to build plants over there, they didn't just want the plants, they insisted that to do business there, they had to move all their supply chains over there too. And so the compounding effect of all the job losses turned into the millions and millions and millions. The other hidden costs have to do with the despair of losing your job, and losing the economic engine of your community, and people turning to other things like drugs, and the amount of deaths that came about, and families that were destroyed because of drug use and alcohol use, because their livelihoods have been destroyed. These hidden costs are incalculable. You can't put a price on them. If you did, it would be mind-boggling. We had 70,000 plants in this country shut down between 2000 and 2007, and manufacturing operations destroyed. Now, those are just the costs, the hidden costs up to this point in time. But what has happened is we've created a monster in the Communist Party's control of the Chinese people, the Chinese economy. We've created a monster that's unleashed a virus on the world. And the hidden costs of those decisions to go to China and help them develop, they sacrificed the concept of short-term gain for the 1 billion customers they thought they would be able to take advantage of. Now, in the long term, we have lost our manufacturing base. We've lost our middle class. And now the world is suffering a global depression because of the effects of a virus that were unleashed from China to the world. Whether it was deliberate or not, I'm not going to get into that discussion. The reality is it originated in China and spread to the world. And the actions of the Chinese government were woefully short and did not prevent it from being, but it actually encouraged it to be spread to the world indirectly or directly. I'll leave that to other people to figure out. The end result is that in this country alone, there's 40 million people on the unemployment line. There is people are out of work, sitting at home. The pain and suffering of all of this is incalculable. Again, you're looking at trillions and tens of trillions of dollars of global economic impact, all brought about by the fact that we allowed the Chinese Communist Party to take advantage of our goodwill and our naivety, in some cases our stupidity, help them develop when they had no intention of ever becoming anything close to a democracy, giving their people the freedoms they deserve. And instead they've been persecuting them and persecuting other nationalities. And now the truth comes out when the Chairman Xi has his big speech a couple of years ago, where he talks about the China 2025 program. And then he has a speech later on about his 2040 program. And what's the goal? The goal is to dominate the world. Dominate the world. All right, not coexist, not to work with, not to become a willing and accepted partner in a market-based economy with free markets and open trade and non-distorted trade. No, they want to dominate the world. Their arrogance has grown to the point where they're not afraid to come out and say, we want to dominate all the industries of the future. We want to dominate the world. Look at us. We've got this big project. We're building roads and bridges around the world to connect everybody to the Chinese economy. And we're loaning money all over the world to countries to build ports. And then when they can't pay the debt, we take over the ports. And oh, by the way, we use our own Chinese workers and our own Chinese police forces in those countries, and so on and so on and so on. We've created a monster, an absolute monster, and now we're paying the price. So the economic toll far outweighs by 1,000 times any benefits the West has gotten from helping China to get to where it is today. China has turned out to be a Trojan horse for the world.
So why do you think manufacturing industry rather than tertiary industry should be central to the U.S. economy?
Well, listen, any country that wants to develop a balanced economy and become a strong global player has to have a manufacturing sector. That's why the countries like Japan, Korea, and now China have worked so hard to build their manufacturing sectors, to create national champions, because they know that without a strong manufacturing sector, you cannot exist and have a strong, balanced economy, and hence have a strong national security profile, and to be able to be a global player in the world. In our case, we let our politicians, we let our finance people, the banking system, the multinational corporations give away our strength in our manufacturing economy. And in my book, I talk about this. When you focus just on services, you become an island nation. You don't have anything. You don't make anything anymore. You don't create anything from Mother Earth. You shuffle papers around, create financial instruments. You sell services to one another. You don't create anything of value, and you have nothing of value added. What's the proof? In my book, I talk about all of the financial bubbles that have been created that we've seen since the early 1990s, and the era of so-called free trade took over. And so you had the savings and loan crisis in the United States. You had which was a financial bubble that impacted the economy. You had the 2000, the high tech bubble that burst. Then you had the Enrons and the WorldComs and the Tycos with their phony balance sheets, because you can't make the kind of profits and have the kind of strength in your economy just by being a service sector. You run out of people to service. You run out of people with money to service. You have to create phony instruments. That's what they did that's what caused the Great Recession, with all these phony instruments that were being repackaged and sold where no real value was being created. And it caught up with the financial community and the banking community. And we had a collapse, and it affected the whole world, and the whole world participated in it. So services by themselves cannot create a balanced, healthy, strong economy. You have to be a nation that makes things, and then you have to be a nation that services those that make things. You can't do it just by being services. We've proved that over and over again, and yet we still seem to focus on there's still people out there that believe that we don't need manufacturing. Well, everybody else in the world knows we need it. The Germans know they need it. The Japanese know they need it. The Koreans know they need it. And the Chinese have done everything in the world to steal everybody's technology, to build up a manufacturing sector so they can dominate the world. The only ones who don't seem to get it are our politicians and our banking folks in the United States.
So, what has made the WTO so incompetent in containing a bad player like China? Bear in mind, the WTO was allegedly to be an organization with teeth.
Yeah, it never had any teeth. It never was meant to have teeth. It was meant to be an organization that furthered the globalization concept. Crucial to the globalization concept was to help China develop, to help all developing countries develop. So the WTO was never created to defend the developed countries. They had the misidea that somehow if they could develop the developing world, China being the largest one, that would somehow return profitability to the developed countries. The problem is they never enforced the rules they put in place. They never held countries like China accountable for not becoming the market economy they committed to being, and to not manipulate their currency, and to not be a state-owned economy. They made all those commitments. They didn't live up to one. They did just the opposite. They strengthened all those things. So you had a WTO that was never created to have the teeth to penalize these folks. It was designed, and the United States, unfortunately, was a big part of that design, through the misguided idea that somehow if we help China grow, China would be a great thing for the world instead of the monster it's become. So the WTO was doomed to failure from the start. And it's proven that. And the biggest failure, that there's a lot of little failures, thousands of them, that relate to other countries and other trading relationships and what have you. But the thing that killed the WTO and made it totally ineffective was they lost control of the China economy. They lost control and did not hold China accountable. The Chinese held out the golden goose of 1.3 billion consumers, and the rest of the world beat the path to its door, not knowing that it was a fly flying into the spider's web. The WTO has been doomed from day one. China made it official.